My twin sister was the favorite, and they kicked me out to live in a tent at 16. Years later, they wanted to move into my house, but I discovered they stole $50,000 from my inheritance and sued them. They never expected I'd force them to sell their house to pay me. I'm 28 years old, I work in real estate, and I need to tell this story because basically my family was trying to destroy me my entire life, and they thought they could keep doing it even now. I guess I should start from the beginning. When I was born, because that's when everything got messed up for me. Literally, from day one. I'm a twin, you know? My sister's name is Olivia, and for as long as I can remember, my parents made it very clear who the favorite was. I'm not exaggerating when I say they treated me like I was a mistake, like they had ordered one daughter and accidentally received two, and decided to keep only one emotionally speaking. I grew up watching Olivia get everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Birthdays were basically celebrations for her, while I got a cake from the cheapest supermarket and maybe a generic card, if I was lucky. She had new clothes every season. I wore her hand-me-downs or secondhand stuff my mom bought at garage sales. I remember perfectly when we were like 10 years old, and Olivia wanted piano lessons. My parents bought her an upright piano that cost like $2,000, put it in the living room, and for months everything was Olivia this, Olivia that. Look how talented Olivia is. I asked for art classes because I liked to draw, and my mom literally told me we didn't have money for that. Can you believe it? $2,000 for a piano, but not even $50 a month for art classes. That's when I started to understand that it wasn't just that Olivia was the favorite, it was that I directly didn't matter. The thing is, it wasn't just the money or the gifts, it was everything. My parents went to every one of Olivia's presentations at school, every event, everything. I could have an art exhibition or whatever, and they just wouldn't show up. One time I won a writing contest in 6th grade, like something important at the county level, and when I got home excited to tell them, my mom barely looked up from her phone and said, "Oh, that's nice, honey," while my dad wasn't even there because he had taken Olivia to buy new shoes. We didn't celebrate anything. They didn't go to the awards ceremony, nothing. But when Olivia got an 8.5 on a math test, they acted like she had discovered the cure for cancer or something. The only person in my entire family who really loved me was my grandfather, my mom's dad. He lived like 20 minutes from us, and I would go visit him whenever I could, because it was the only place where I felt like I mattered, you know? My grandfather would ask me about school, about my drawings, about everything. He taught me how to bake bread, something that ended up being super important later. But I'll get to that. He'd tell me stories from when he was young. He made me feel seen. Olivia never went to visit him. She was always too busy with her activities or her friends, and my parents never made her go. But I wanted to be there. I needed that space where someone actually cared about me. When I was 14 years old, my grandfather started getting sick. It was cancer, and it was fast. Like in 6 months, he went from being relatively okay to being in palliative care. I went to the hospital every day after school. I'd sit with him, read to him. Sometimes, we'd just be there in silence. My parents went maybe once a week. Olivia went like twice total, because she said hospitals gave her anxiety. I remember my grandfather told me once, a few days before he died, "You're special. Don't let anyone make you believe otherwise." And I just nodded because I had a lump in my throat, and I knew if I spoke, I was going to break. He died a week before my 15th birthday, and it was like losing the only light in my life. Seriously. After he died, things at home got worse somehow. I was grieving, obviously, and my parents acted like it was an exaggeration. My mom told me I needed to get over it, that life goes on, while she herself seemed barely affected by her own father's death. Olivia was in her world as always, worried about her things, about her new boyfriend who was 19 years old. She was 15, and yeah, that should have been a giant red flag for my parents, but they thought the guy was great. The boyfriend's name was... I don't really remember his full name. Everyone called him something like Jake or Jason. I don't know. He was a guy with no future who worked temp jobs and drove a beat-up car, but my parents adored him because he made Olivia feel special. So we get to when we were 16 years old, and this is where the story gets really heavy. One day I came home from school and found my whole family in the living room, like serious family meeting, and I thought something bad had happened. I sat down and my parents looked weird, uncomfortable, and Olivia was crying. My dad clears his throat and says we need to talk about something important. Olivia has something to tell us. and Olivia. Through tears, drops. I'm pregnant. I just sat there, like, okay, processing, because she was 16 years old, pregnant by a 19-year-old guy who could barely hold a job. And I expected my parents to get furious or something, right? But no. My mom immediately starts comforting her. My dad says everything's going to be okay, that they're going to support her, that the baby is going to be a blessing. After like half an hour of drama and tears and plans about how they were going to handle everything, my dad looks at me and says, "We need to talk to you alone." Olivia and my mom go to the kitchen, and my dad sits in front of me with that serious face he'd make when he was about to tell me something I wasn't going to want to hear. And he tells me, "The baby is going to need its own room, and you and Olivia can't keep sharing, so you're going to have to move out." I thought he was joking, like I waited for him to say, "Just kidding." But no, he was completely serious. I said, "Move out where?" And he said, "We're going to put a tent in the backyard. You'll be fine there." I couldn't believe it. I literally couldn't process what I was hearing. I told him, "Are you serious? You're going to kick me out of my room?" My room? Because Olivia decided to get pregnant at 16, and he got angry and said, "Don't talk about your sister like that. She needs you. Family supports each other." And I exploded. Like I yelled at them that it had always been like this, that it was always me who had to sacrifice for Olivia, that they never cared about me. And my dad stood up and said, "If you don't like it, you can leave completely, but as long as you live under my roof, you'll do what I say." My mom came in because of the noise, and when I asked her if she agreed with this, she just said, "You have to understand, the baby needs space, and you're old enough to manage." And that's how I ended up living in a tent in the backyard of my parents' house at 16 years old, in October, with winter approaching. They moved all my stuff, like my bed, my clothes, everything, and put it in the garage or threw it away, and gave me the tent, a couple of blankets, and basically told me to deal with it. I kept going to school, because I legally had to, but it was impossible to concentrate when I was sleeping in the cold, when I didn't have a proper place to do homework, when I was basically surviving day to day. I used the garden hose to wash up in the mornings with freezing water. I'd go into the house only to use the bathroom, and my parents acted like everything was completely normal. Olivia settled into our room, well, her room now, and they started converting the guest room into a nursery. They bought all this expensive baby stuff, new furniture, painted the walls, while I was outside freezing every night. Olivia's boyfriend started coming over more often. Sometimes he'd stay overnight in the room with Olivia, with my parents' permission, which seemed insane to me. And I just existed in my tent like I was invisible. Weeks passed, then months, and the weather got worse. November came, December, and there were nights where I literally thought I was going to die from the cold. I used all the blankets I had, all my clothes on top of me, and I still shivered all night without being able to sleep. At school, I started failing classes because I couldn't concentrate. I had no energy. And teachers started asking what was wrong. I didn't know what to tell them. Like, how do you explain that your parents kicked you out of your house, but technically you're still living there? A counselor called me to her office, and when I finally told her everything, she went pale and said she had to report it, but I begged her not to because I was afraid they'd send me to a foster home or something worse. In the end, she didn't report anything, but she gave me information about resources for homeless youth and asked if I had anywhere to go. I had nothing. My grandfather had died. I had no other close relatives, and I had no friends with families who could help me because I was too embarrassed to tell them my situation. What saved me was a local bakery called something like Frank's Bakery. The owner was an older guy, Frank, kind of gruff but with a good heart. And I had gone there a couple of times because they made incredible bread, and it reminded me of when I'd bake with my grandfather. One day, I went in because I had like $2 I'd found in my backpack and I wanted something hot to eat. And Frank saw me and asked if I was okay because I guess I looked terrible. Sunken eyes, dirty clothes, all that. I told him I was fine, but he didn't believe me. And after a while of insisting, I told him my situation. Not all of it, but enough for him to understand I was basically on the street. Frank told me he needed help at the bakery, someone to clean after closing, to do deliveries in the mornings, that kind of thing. He offered me work, like minimum wage but in cash, and I said yes immediately. I started working there every day after school and on weekends, and Frank would let me stay at the bakery when it was too cold outside, let me sleep in the back area after he closed. It probably wasn't legal, But he didn't care, and I was so grateful. I almost cried every time he gave me free food or let me take bread home. Well, to my tent. I worked there for months, saving every penny I earned, and at some point, like in February or March, Frank told me he had a small room above the bakery that he used for storage. He told me if I cleaned it and fixed it up, I could live there instead of in the tent. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Like a real room, with a roof and walls and heating? I said yes before he could change his mind. And I spent a whole weekend cleaning that room, taking out old boxes, sweeping, mopping. I even painted it with paint Frank had stored. It was small, like 3 meters by 3 meters. No private bathroom, but there was one downstairs in the bakery I could use. And for me, it was like a palace. I moved in there with my few belongings, and for the first time in months, I could really sleep. Warm, safe. My parents didn't even notice I had left. Like they never asked, never came looking for me. Nothing. Olivia had her baby in May, a girl, I think. And I didn't even go to the hospital because why? I wasn't welcome in that family, that had been made very clear. I kept working at the bakery, kept going to school, though barely, and somehow I managed to graduate. Not with good grades, but graduate nonetheless. After graduating, I got another job at a convenience store. I worked night shifts because they paid a little more, and I kept working at the bakery during the day. Basically, I slept like 4 hours a day, ate the minimum to save money, and every penny I earned, I saved. I had no social life. I didn't go out. I didn't spend on anything that wasn't necessary. People probably thought I was crazy, working so much. But I had a goal, you know? I wanted to have my own house. I wanted security. I wanted to never depend on anyone again. Years went by like this, working multiple jobs, saving everything. Eventually, I got a better job at a real estate office. I started as an assistant, but I learned fast. I got my license, and I started selling houses. It turned out I was good at it, like really good, because I understood what people were looking for when they wanted a home, that feeling of security and belonging that I had never had. My commissions started growing. I kept saving aggressively. And when I was 26 years old, 2 years ago, I had enough money for a down payment on a house. I found a 3-bedroom house in a good neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but decent, safe, mine. The day I closed on the purchase, I cried. Like I hadn't cried since my grandfather died, because I had achieved something my parents never thought I would achieve, something I did completely on my own. I moved in with the little I had, bought secondhand furniture, and little by little I turned that house into a home. Frank came to visit me and brought homemade bread. And it was like the sweetest moment, because he had been more family to me than my own parents ever were. During those years, I had no contact with my family. 0. I didn't know anything about Olivia, the baby, my parents, and I didn't care. But then, like 6 months after buying my house, one day I'm home on a Saturday afternoon, and someone rings the doorbell. I open the door and there they are. My mom, my dad, Olivia with a little girl, guessed the baby, who was now like 5 years old, and Olivia's boyfriend, who was apparently now her husband. They stood there like nothing, and my mom says, "Hi, honey. It's been so long since we heard from you. We heard you bought a house." I just looked at them like, "What are you doing here? How did you know my address?" And my dad says, "Well, you work in real estate. It wasn't hard to find you." There was an awkward silence, and Olivia finally says, "Can we come in? We need to talk to you." I didn't want to let them in, but something in me, maybe curiosity or maybe that part that still wanted to believe that maybe they had come to apologize, let them in. They sat in my living room, looking around, and my mom says it's nice. Small but nice. And I just waited because I knew they hadn't come just to visit me. My dad cut to the chase. He said they had been having financial problems, that Olivia's husband wasn't making enough money, that they were helping them with bills but couldn't anymore, and that they had heard I had a 3-bedroom house. Can you believe where this was going? My mom said they thought it would be good if we all lived together, like family, that they and Olivia with her family would move into my house, that we could split expenses, be a family again. The little girl was running around my living room touching my things, and Olivia wasn't even stopping her, just sitting there waiting for my answer like it was obvious I was going to say yes. I sat there processing. Like, are you really here asking me to give you my house after everything you did to me? And my dad says I know things weren't perfect before, But you're our daughter, we're family, and family supports each other. I let out a laugh, like without humor, and said, family? You're talking to me about family after you kicked me out to live in a tent at 16 years old? My mom frowned and said, you're exaggerating. You had a place to stay. We gave you options. Options. They called that options. I told them to leave. That they weren't going to live in my house. That I wanted nothing to do with them. My dad turned red and started yelling that I was selfish, that I didn't understand what being family was, that after everything they had done for me, this was how I repaid them. And I exploded, like I yelled at them everything I had kept in for years, how they had treated me, how they abandoned me, how I never mattered to them. Olivia started crying, saying I had always been dramatic, that they had only done the best they could, and that made me angrier because she couldn't even admit it was wrong. I kicked them out of my house, literally told them to get out before I called the police, and they left, but not before my dad said, this isn't going to stay like this. You're going to regret this. At that moment, I thought it was just an empty threat. You know, an angry father saying stupid things. But like 2 weeks later, I received legal papers at my door. Olivia was suing me, claiming the house should be family property because she was my twin and we shared everything, or some completely insane thing like that. The legal argument was weak, like very weak. But the fact that they tried it infuriated me. I hired a lawyer, Karen, who was known for being ruthless and not taking nonsense from anyone. I explained the whole situation to her, showed her all my purchase documents, bank records showing I had paid for everything, and she told me not to worry, that this wasn't going anywhere. But Karen was thorough, and she started investigating everything, and that's when she found something I didn't know. It turns out that when my grandfather died, he had left me an inheritance, like a significant amount, like $50,000. I never knew about this because I never received anything, and Karen discovered that my parents had taken that money, claiming they were saving it for me until I was of age, but they never gave it to me. When Karen told me this, I almost threw up. Like I literally felt nauseous. My parents had stolen my inheritance, the last gift from the only person who had loved me, and they used it for themselves, probably to pay for all of Olivia's stuff and her baby. Karen said this was fraud, that it was theft, and that I could sue them for this. At first I hesitated because, did I really want to get into a legal battle against my parents? But then I thought about everything they had done to me, how they had treated me my whole life, and I said, do it. Sue them for everything. The legal battle was long and ugly, like really ugly. My parents denied everything at first, said there was no inheritance, that Karen was making things up, but she had proof, documents from my grandfather's will, bank records showing the transfers. Olivia withdrew her ridiculous lawsuit when she realized I had a real case against our parents. I guess she didn't want to be associated with that. For months, it was back and forth, hearings, depositions, and finally we went to court. The day of the final hearing, I was so nervous I could barely breathe, but I showed up with Karen and made my case in front of the judge. My parents were there with their lawyer, looking miserable and angry, and when the judge heard everything, saw all the evidence, his face got serious. He ruled completely in my favor, said my parents had to return the $50,000 plus interest, plus damages, plus legal costs, everything. It ended up being like $70,000 total, and the judge also said some things about how they had handled the situation that were basically like a judicial reprimand, telling them their behavior had been deplorable. I walked out of that courtroom, feeling vindicated but also empty somehow, because at the end of the day I had to sue my own parents to get justice. My parents had to sell their house to pay me, because they didn't have that money in cash, and I know they ended up moving into a small apartment with Olivia and her family, all cramped together. Ironic, considering how they made me live. I haven't spoken to any of them since the ruling. I blocked their numbers, their social media, everything. Olivia tried to contact me once by email saying I had destroyed the family, and I just replied that the family was destroyed years ago when they decided I didn't matter. Now I'm here, 2 years after buying my house, with that inheritance money finally in my account, making my financial situation so much better. I use part of that money for investments, for my future, and I've thought about moving to a bigger city, starting completely fresh where nobody knows my story. Frank is still part of my life. I see him every week. We have dinner together sometimes, and he's the family I chose. The real family. Sometimes I think about what my life would be like if my grandfather hadn't died, if he had been there to defend me when I was 16, but I guess I'll never know. What I do know is that I survived, that I built a life for myself when nobody thought I could, and that in the end, justice existed even though I had to fight very hard for it. People ask me sometimes if I miss my family, if there's part of me that wants to reconcile, and the honest answer is no. I don't miss the pain, the neglect, feeling invisible. I've built my own life, on my own terms, and that's more valuable to me than any forced relationship with people who never valued me. Is it perfect? No. Some nights I still think about everything, and I get angry or sad. But most days I'm okay. I'm proud of who I am and what I achieved. And that, I guess, is enough.